I'm going to set my timer. I love doing this. You understand? I love studying Torah together on the holidays, and Rabbi Baum and I have a deal. What is the deal? That I get to go as long as I want and you sit there quietly not making any faces? I think that was the deal we negotiated we're going for. So, we have a lot to do, not a lot of time to do it in. And as many of you know, this is actually a precursor to an adult education that Rabbi Baum is going to do, I think, in December at Beth Adam on a Sunday morning. Because the Torah portion we picked, the story of Judah and Tamar, is such a complex story with many shades and issues in it that we cannot do it justice doing it, having done part of it last week and part of it this week. One of the interesting observations that I gleaned as I talked to people after Rosh Hashanah was the number of people who said, I even went to religious school and I don't ever remember anyone ever telling me this story. I went to see Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and I saw them sing and I saw them dance, but the story, which is right in the middle of the story of Joseph, there wasn't even a song. Tamar wasn't mentioned. And what it's reflective of is, I think, one of the dilemmas in Judaism. I think we have reduced Judaism to children's Judaism. Dr. Reines, one of my professors, used to call it pediatric Judaism. That we have taken out all the complex issues, the philosophic thinking, even the stories of our ancestors that provoke problems. Rather than dealing with them, we avoided them. There was always a fear that somehow if we read some of these things, people would say, if this is my ancestors, I don't want to be Jewish. I think we have done a disservice to our ancestors and to ourselves when we avoid dealing with the complexities that Judaism presents, and we avoid dealing with stories such as Judah and Tamar. Because this story has within it so many issues and so many pieces. As we go forward and look at this, and I actually have notes, because I will go on for like 2 hours on this. The thing, I still may go in 2 hours, but at least I have notes to do it. Okay. So, couple things that are very important as we go about looking at the story about Judah and Tamar. First, this isn't history, it's literature. Let me say it again. This is not history, it is literature. These people in all likelihood didn't exist. But our ancestors wrote the story existed. And they wrote the story for a reason. Secondly, these stories weren't children's stories. They were adult stories that dealt with society, they dealt with complex issues, they dealt with different periods of time simultaneously. They alluded to things that we may not fully understand because we may not fully understand the context in which they are written. It is important to know that when we read this story, we're going to talk about aspects. Some of the issues that this story relates to, reaches out and continues to touch us today. After we read this story, you may say, this is one bizarre story. These were really strange issues. And we may not want to deal with them, but understand some of the issues that were raised in this story affect issues that we discuss today. The Torah isn't, or the Bible isn't just something of long ago and far away. Its impact continues to be felt, and it is important to understand how it got to what it was and how we got to the place we are. In order to understand the story of Judah and Tamar, we read part of it last week at Rosh Hashanah. You need to understand a couple sort of big principles, and I want to give you those before we go forward. One is called Levirate marriage. Levirate marriage, Levirate is actually a Latin term. The Hebrew term is yabum, which could easily have been made into a song for Joseph. It has a nice rhythm to it. It could have been a really cute piece. They could have been singing it, but they chose not to. It is the principle that if a man dies before he produces an offspring, his widow is obligated to marry his next younger sibling in order that that individual, that man, produces a child for him. Remember, men could have multiple marriages, women could not. That's called Levirate marriage. It says, it's actually in, you can read in the text, in Deuteronomy it says, if one brother dies and leaves no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall unite with her, take her as his wife, and perform the Levirite's duty. The first son that she bears shall be accounted to the dead brother. It's a way for inheritance. Now there is, or was, a ceremony called chalitza, which is a ceremony of release if somebody didn't want to do it. It is one, I'm trying to think of an appropriate word, fascinating, amazing, remarkable ceremony in which, and let me read it, if the man does not want to marry his brother's widow shall appear before the elders, these are the town elders, and declare, my husband's brother refuses to establish a name in Israel for his brother. He will not perform the duty of a Levirate. And then it says, in the presence of the elders, his brother's widow will go to him, pull the sandal off his foot, spit in his face. Cool stuff. This is why they didn't teach us in religious school. And make his declaration, thus shall be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. It's called chalitza. Special sandal, pull it off, spit in the face, make the declaration. It is a fascinating. Why does the man have to lift his foot off the ground? Not only does it have to take the sandal off, but there's implications about that. What does the sandal represent? Why would you spit in someone's face in public? There is sociological, psychological, and sexual overtones and undertones to this story. It is a fascinating one, and that ceremony still exists. While Levirate marriage has been essentially banned, it's been argued about in Israel, there are still individuals who feel that this ceremony is necessary in order for a woman to be released to be able to marry somebody else. What's in this book actually matters, even when we disagree with it. Okay, so here's the recap, because actually I'm going to read a little Torah. Okay, so I'm doing pretty good. Okay, so here's the recap. Tamar is married to Er. Er dies, no son. She is then given to Onan, or Onan, depending on how you pronounce his name. He doesn't fulfill his obligations using a biblical form of contraception. He is punished by God and dies. Tamar is then left again as a widow, and she is then pledged to Shelah, the third and the youngest son, who is young, and Judah, her father-in-law, is sort of worried that this woman may be a sort of a bad omen. So he separates. You know, she's the black widow of the Bible, right? Two men have already died. Maybe not a good thing to marry off your third son to him. Tamar is then separated, sent back to her family's home, and she is sort of, as biblical women were just sort of sitting there. She could do nothing. But she decides to do something, and we read about this last week. She decides to dress up in different garb, cover her face, and as Judah is then walking, and we're going to get into some of these things a little more in detail, going to a big sheep festival, sees this woman along the road, and walks over to her and says, you want to consort with me? And she says, sure. Or actually she doesn't say anything. It's sort of the story. And she says, but before we do this, so how are you going to pay? And he says, well, I don't have any goats with me, which would have been the appropriate sort of payment. She said, that's fine, but I want your rod, your staff, and your signet. All sort of your American Express, your MasterCards, and your driver's license. You leave them with me, and when you return with the payment, I'll give it back. You ever have that done? We have to leave the same kind of thing. You have to leave your ID at the desk before you get the book. So that was the deal. That's where we are in the story. So what we're at the moment of is now Judah wants to fulfill his obligation to pay this woman who he doesn't know who she is. So he sends a friend to do that. And the friend said, and it says, Yeshal et anshe makoma, And he asked the men of the town, Lamor, saying, Ayeh hakadesha hi beinaim el hadera. Where is that, and I got to leave this word kadesha a moment, where is that woman, or where's that woman who is at the crossroads? Vayomer, and the men say, Lo haita v'zeh kadesha. There is not a kadesha there. This is really very interesting. I think so. This word kadesha, I'm going to translate in a moment. But before I even give you the translation of the word, one of the things that's important, there is no such thing as a translation of the Bible. There are interpretations in different languages. Translations, by definitions, are interpretations. Because what word you select nuances the story. Now, some words we don't care about. River. Well, it could be a river or a stream. Is it a mighty river, a small river, a big river? Okay. This word is important. The word here is kadesha. Some of you may know the word kiddush, the ceremony of wine, comes from the same root. Or if you might know the word kodesh, it means holy. Kadesha comes from that same root. And I have read now about 12 different translations for that word. Because no one's quite sure how they want to translate it. Because how you translate it exposes and changes the story and points to a history in Judaism that a lot of folks don't want to deal with. The common translations, and I think the translation Rabbi Baum used last week, was the word prostitute. So depending on what book you go to, you will find the word courtesan, harlot, prostitute, whore, sacred prostitute, holy prostitute, or cult prostitute. Those are all popular translations for that same word. Now, I would suggest to you those words have very different meanings. You can almost categorize them. Courtesan, whore, harlot, prostitute, those seem to be in one category, and those that are modified by the word sacred, holy, or cult seems to place this person in a different role. What role would that be? That role would be that there was a fertility cult that existed at this period of time. A fertility cult. And one of the acts that was performed was sexual acts, just like they were sympathetic magic, meaning the idea that what happens on earth affects the magic of the sky. And in fact, who was empowered to be part of this fertility cult? Who was probably the leader of the fertility cult? Women. It probably emanates out of this period of time of perhaps goddess worship and fertility cults. Now, what's interesting is even the translations of prostitute or cult prostitute seems to see this is more about men than about women. There's a whole other theory that the word should be holy women or sacred women. That's what this woman was. She was a holy woman standing at the side of the road, which was a common place for them to be, because they were going to the sheep festival, which may sound sort of dull to us, but it was reflective of a fertility cult kind of experience. And Judah was going there, was traveling there, and he was going to engage in a fertility cult ritual, and he encountered this woman who would have probably been around for the fertility cult and participated in that. Now, our ancestors, now this is where it gets confusing, may not have liked the notion of fertility cults anymore. They wanted to create a new kind of Judaism that pushed that aside. So commentators certainly translated this and interpreted this in many ways. They tried to make Judah a better guy by saying, he wasn't looking to have any kind of sexual relations. He didn't even have a goat with him. If he really was planning to do that, he would have had Payman walking next to him. Which sort of brings, I just have lots of images of men in the Bible walking with their goats behind them. But that's how you read it. I didn't make this stuff up, honest. It's in the book. You can find it in other people's books. Okay. So, he didn't have it with him. So this idea is, depending on how this story is now interpreted, we can actually now see several layers in Judaism in one verse. How you translate it. A fertility period, cult period of time, women much more in charge, the notion of holy or sacred women. Laid upon that then becomes sort of the patriarchal system that we know of Judaism. This story probably predates that, so they had to work with what that was already known, because Tamar becomes important. So let's keep on going. So, and so after we were told that there was no prostitute. Vayomer lo hayta v'zeh kadesha. There was no prostitute there. And vayashav el Yehuda, and he returns to Judah, the friend, and he says, Vayomer lo mitzatiha. I did not find her. V'gam anshe hamakom amru lo hayta v'zeh kadesha. I couldn't find her, and the people of the town said, the men of the town said, there were no sacred women there. That was not a place I would find them. And Judah says, Vayomer Yehuda, tikach len pen yeh lavuz. Let her keep the things I gave her, lest we become a laughingstock. Hine shalachti hagdi hazeh va'ato lo mitzateha. I was willing to give her the goat, but we can't find her. So keep the signet, keep the ring, keep the signet, keep the rods, keep the hoard, and I'll keep the goat. And the story continues. Vayhi mishlosh hadashim, and after 3 months now have passed. Vayugad leYehuda lemor, and he told Judah, saying, Zanta Tamar kilatecha. Now this is a new word. Zanta is the word for prostitute. That's how I would translate that word. Now he didn't say kadesha. He said Zanta. Zanta Tamar kilatecha. Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot. V'gam hine harar lizonim, and because of it, she has become pregnant. And Judah says, V'yomer Yehuda, Hotziehu v'tisharef, bring her out and have her be burned. So she's pregnant with his child. He doesn't know that yet. He will in 2 passages when he sees her walking out with the signet and the cord. But he tells her to be burned, which is interesting because that's not the biblical punishment for adultery. The biblical punishment for adultery is stoning. Which raises the question, why would she be burned? If you accept the theory that she was a sacred woman out of another tradition, burning was the correct punishment, not stoning. So that's another argument for that. But he was willing to have her killed. What happens next is Tamar reveals that it is Judah's child that she is with. Judah then releases her, and as we found out, she gives birth to twins, one of whom becomes the ancestor of King David, who is the ancestor then of the Messiah in Jewish tradition. This story captures so many elements. One, women being trapped by Levirate marriages, the rules of adultery that allow men to have multiple sexual encounters but women not to, the limits on women to be able to even give voice to their concerns when they want to. The non-Jewish rule in Judaism. Tamar is considered not Jewish, which is also interesting. Big debates in Judaism about interfaith marriage. A lot of us have heard about it, been involved in it. Here at Congregation Beth Adam, we are welcoming, and we find interfaith marriage something that we embrace and welcome. In Judaism, that was also always the case. Oddly enough, for us, all the debate that was taking place, King David's great-great-great-grandmothers were non-Jewish women, which is interesting. That whole debate was taking, or conversation was in the Bible at that time. And the last thing that's really important, these stories are very complex. They represent a morality of a very particular period of time. They raise issues that are even difficult for us to discuss today. We live in a world where lots of people run around quoting the book to say this is how we should live. I want you to think about the story next time you hear someone pulling some verse out of the Bible and saying, this is the right way. Tell them about Judah and Tamar. Say, what do you think about that stuff? You want to bring Levirate marriage back? You think women should have to spit in the face of men in order to be released? To use the Bible as a proof of how we should be living today is a disservice to those of us today, and it is a disservice to those who wrote it. They had intent, they had needs, they had to wrestle with a complex society. Just like they did it in their way, we are obliged to do the same in our time. These are good stories, interesting stories, fascinating stories, but they are not proof of how we should be living.